CO2 emission.
Thank you very much, ma'am. My greetings to Her Excellency Dr. Ngozi, to my good friend, Excellency Mr. Valdez, to all the other distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Undoubtedly, we have over the last several years been working as a team to address this very significant challenge before the entire world. There can be no two opinions about the fact that countries such as India have not really contributed to this problem in the first place. Our own contribution is very small when it comes to the emissions or the climate change challenges, particularly when we look at the size of our population on a per capita basis. But that's also because we are very much lower on the development cycle. And many countries which have developed, which have brought prosperity to their people, have enjoyed the carbon space that is available to have low-cost energy. That low-cost energy has helped them to create infrastructure, develop industry, and bring prosperity to their people. It's very unfair today if we were to try and bring trade policy or trade barriers and use trade as the means to foist upon the developing world or the less developed countries conditionalities which will cause their own level. I think it's important that there should be differentiated responsibilities when it comes to the less developed or developing world and the developed countries. They have to fulfill the commitments they made in Paris, particularly relating to capital, particularly relating to technology. And I can assure you that India, which played a very important role in Paris in getting a global consensus around the very important need to take a high level of ambitions, high level of nationally determined contribution so that we can restrict the global temperatures from rising. We would love to do better than what we have committed there. And I can assure all the participants of this conference that India, and we are one of the few countries which is very carefully monitoring the progress we are making. We submit our biannual report to the UNFCCC. We are confident we will exceed the NDCs that we have placed before the world. But we do hope that the developed world will not use the interplay of trade and climate challenge too much, because I think trade should allow all countries to prosper, to take prosperity to all parts of the world. We should not create trade barriers which will ultimately become a hindrance to taking prosperity to the poorer, lesser developed countries. But rather, the United Nations and other multilateral agencies like the UNFCCC should focus on getting the world together to fulfill their commitments around climate change. So I do believe we have to decouple trade policy and our green goals, and let the trade policy look for more inclusive growth all over the world, and let us all work towards what my Prime Minister had introduced in Paris, Prime Minister Modi, climate justice and sustainable lifestyle. I think if we can all agree that climate justice should be protected, policy space should be given to the developed world, and the developed countries should seriously reconsider their pattern of consumption and focus on sustainable lifestyles. I think that can be a great contribution of trade forums also to help the world come out of this very, very significant challenge that we are all facing. And I have no doubt in my mind that all of us are very concerned and we'll work with a renewed thrust in the post-COVID world to achieve our climate goals, with the United States coming back into the, let's say, into the game of protecting the world. I have no doubt that the world is safe, is secure, trade will stand on its own leg, and climate change will get equal importance, equal focus. Thank you.
Introduction of the discussion and putting the scope on the position as a big country as India regarding the importance of both trade and climate, but also the necessity to have an equal distribution of the cost and the capacity to fund new strategies. So thank you for that. And just to introduce the next panelist or discutant, I have after you, Madame Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of World Trade Organization, also Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis, the European Commissioner and Vice President of the Commissioner on Trade from the European Union, Mrs. Amani Abu Zaid, Commissioner in African Union responsible for infrastructure and energy. And I have Mrs. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General, Ibero-American General Secretariat, and my next boss. So welcome to you, Madam Greenspan. So I give now the floor to Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of WTO. Madam Ngozi, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Isabel, and let me equally greet His Excellency, Minister Piyush Goyal, and commend him for a very strong statement he just made. Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis, good to see you again. And my two sisters, Amani, great to see you. And Rebecca, congratulations. I guess we can acknowledge you openly now. It's great to have you and Isabel both at UNCTAD. Well, let me just say that Minister Piyush Goyal has just made a very strong statement, which also outlines the concerns of developing countries about whatever measures are done in trade. They should not be seen as protectionism. Should not any trade measures that include positive support to the environment and to environmental goods and services should not be used as a barrier to trade. And I totally agree with that. There are a lot of concerns of developing countries about that. But at the same time, I do think that the role of trade in climate change and in the environment has not really been taken very strongly into account, as you yourself said, Isabel. And I believe that there's a role that trade can play that is very important, that can help with a positive, towards a positive support of our environmental and biodiversity goals, whilst at the same time creating jobs and also being very conscious not to get into protectionist measures. I really think that there can be green and inclusive growth. So let me say a few words about that. With respect to the WTO, it's very interesting that when the GATT morphed into the WTO 25 years ago, there was a very far-reaching statement of the purpose of the WTO, which obtains today. It said the WTO was about enhancing living standards, creating employment, and supporting sustainable development. This was in 1994-95. So sustainable development has been embedded into the mission, the purpose of the WTO. Many people don't know that because now WTO has become just a negotiating forum, and we've forgotten that, trade is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So to me, though, that purpose is all about people. Sustainable development is all about people. So we should support our biodiversity and our climate whilst bearing in mind it must enhance the living standards of people. So in that respect, I think we need to rethink some of our trade policies of today, to bring them up to date. One area is looking at some of our tariff policies in our countries because they've not yet been brought into sync with what is happening with the environment today. We have in many countries, in fact, tariffs on environmentally friendly goods. And let me just take one example. Clean cooking stoves. Our work has shown that in many countries, the average tariff applied on this is about 6.5%. And at the additional taxes, once they come in, that are almost double the price of the clean cooking stoves. And we know that this is something that saves lives. There are 4 million premature deaths, mostly of women, due to indoor polluting cooking stoves. And, so these clean cooking stoves, help us reduce carbon emissions in the environment. So we should look at what type of tariff policies do we have. I'm just using that as an example, but there are many other environmentally friendly goods. And as a former finance minister, I found that very often finance ministers and the financial policies don't often talk to trade ministers or even talk to environment ministers to come together to craft holistic policies that are supportive of the environment. So I think that whole set of changing and set of behavior and the need to coordinate more of a whole of government approach needs to be put in place as well. You mentioned the issue of fossil fuel subsidies. We're all struggling with this. There are $400 to $500 billion worth of fossil fuel subsidies in the world, but much of it actually is in the developed world. These are direct subsidies. I know that about $23 billion of this is from Africa. But whatever the case, we need to phase out. This is politically very sensitive. As again, during my time as finance minister, we tried to phase out fossil fuel subsidies in Nigeria, and we had riots in the streets, a lot of protests. So it's very politically sensitive. So we need to be careful how we do it, to explain and demonstrate, as we try to do to our own people. Eventually, we managed to phase out 50% of the subsidies at the time, that it's not really supporting the poorer people in the population. And it's really subsidizing middle and upper income people. But this is, non-environmentally friendly, and we could do so much more. Of course, we need a transition period to do this, all of this. We have to think about how we handle the transition of resource-rich countries that are dependent on fossil fuels like mine, Nigeria. It's not overnight you can transform everything. So we need a transition period, and we need a just transition. Minister Goyal said something about many developing countries feeling they didn't contribute to climate change, and yet they have to pay some price. There's some truth in that, but I believe we all have to contribute because we are all part of this planet. But we need to do that in a just fashion. And so with respect to the WTO members, we have very important activities going on. We have structured discussions on environment and trade and environmental sustainability, looking at what kinds of measures could be put in place that are not protectionist, but are environmentally friendly. We have discussions going on plastics pollution, for instance. What can we do about that? Because this is something that is clogging up our oceans. And of course, later on, I'll talk about the fisheries subsidies negotiations, but that is going on. So we hope these will, culminate in some statement at the ministerial conference that will really map a way towards how trade can be more supportive on environment. And of course, there's the almighty issue of carbon tax, carbon pricing in the economy. We have a very fragmented system now with 64 jurisdictions that are implementing carbon pricing, ranging from less than $1 a ton, let's say in Ukraine, to about $130 per ton in Sweden. And the thing is, this is very fragmented. It's very difficult for business. How do we come to a global carbon price? That will be something very important that we need to think about in future, that will not disadvantage some populations or some sectors vis-a-vis others. So this is something that is really new. Our thinking is very preliminary at the WTO, but it's something we cannot ignore. And of course, I won't get into the issue of carbon border adjustment. I'll leave that to Valdis and the very difficult the difficulties that may pervade some of these measures that we need to think about. So let me leave it there and say we are working hard now. I'm quite excited about the potential for movement on trade and environment.
Thank you, Dr. Gozi. And I would like to wish you a nice birthday and I thank you to be with us today, because I knew that it requires an important engagement for you, and it shows how important trade and environment issues have to be managed in the future. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Isabel.
So now I turn to Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis, and my question for the EU, for you, Mr. Commissioner, will be the following. So, as mentioned by Madame Gozi, the EU has shown its global leadership and commitment to reduce CO2, and as part of the Green Deal, a carbon border adjustment mechanism is envisaged. So how do you think this will affect developing countries, and how would the EU plan to support developing countries to reduce the CO2 content of their export without impede their developments? So, Commissioner of the EU, it's up to you.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for this invitation to UN Trade Forum, and I also then would like to join in my congratulations to Dr. Gozi in her birthday. So, moving to today's topic, global climate leadership should be measured against two metrics. So, first, what are the policies pursued domestically? And second, how do you bring others along with you? So at the EU, as you know, we have an ambitious domestic agenda, the Green Deal, but we are also strongly committed to support a green transition of developing countries in parallel with their integration in the world economy. And our external policies will work in synergy to achieve this goal, which we notably made important objective also of our trade policy. Let me illustrate this with some concrete examples. We published a new EU trade strategy earlier this year, and Africa is one of the top priorities outlined in this strategy. So we are working with Africa to forge a trade and investment relationship of equals. There is a significant potential to promote sustainable development and investment to strengthen economic integration. The EU aims to enhance the investment climate in African countries through a combination of sustainable investment agreements and development cooperation initiatives. In this way, we will work together in areas of mutual benefit in our respective green transitions. The EU is also the third largest trade partner of Latin America and the first investor in the region. We have developed a network of trade agreements in Latin America, and it will be further reinforced with conclusion of the agreement with Mercosur, modernization of Mexico agreement, conclusion of negotiations on the modernization of Chile agreement. Similarly, we engage actively in countries in Indo-Pacific region to enhance trade and investment relationship. We already have trade agreements with Japan, South Korea, as well as Singapore and Vietnam. Negotiations are advancing with Australia and New Zealand, and we are making progress with Indonesia. And the recent EU-India leaders meet relaunch our negotiations of free trade agreement, and also to negotiate separate investment protection agreement and agreement on geographic indications. Actually, we worked with Minister Goyal quite intensively to achieve this result for the summit. And we also have in the EU a generous system of unilateral tariff preferences we grant to developing and least developed countries, so generalized system of preferences, and it's currently under the review. in a view of improving the sustainable development dimension, for example, of incorporating objectives of the Paris Agreement into this framework of a generalized system of preferences. Well, as I said, domestically, we are making major efforts towards carbon neutrality, which will require huge transformation of our economy and the way we produce. And the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which you mentioned, must be seen in this context. We know that we need to address the problem of carbon leakage. Because if EU producers move production to countries with laxer emission limits, it will not only allow emissions to be cut, as they at the end of the day will increase globally, so frustrating both EU climate mitigation efforts and also global efforts against climate change. Of course, we are fully aware that this strategy requires balance and fairness, so we aim to ensure that the carbon border adjustment mechanism is going to be fully in line with the WTO rules. So we expect our proposal in mid-July from the European Commission side, and depending on legislative process, it can be expected to enter into force in 2023. As regards specific sectors covered by carbon border adjustment mechanism, it's still a work in progress, but normally we expect to concentrate on most polluting sectors like cement, iron and steel, electricity, fertilizers, to give some example. And I want to be very clear that EU remains very attentive to the needs of developing countries. We are conscious of the need for a series of initiatives to support their green transitions. It includes financial support, promoting climate projects, capacity building, and our CBAM proposal will be W2 compatible, as I said, and will include necessary flexibilities to recognize the genuine efforts of other countries and individual importers in the EU. After all, global climate ambition is a shared endeavor, both for developed and developing countries. We need all the world fully on board. And in this context, of course, it's critical that EU is supporting developing countries in this transition, and we are fully committed to do so. And also, following our legislative proposal in July, we will continue engaging in discussions with developing countries to ensure that they are supported in their climate transition efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for this interesting pathway for the EU regarding EU goals and the capacity to really take into consideration the developing countries. And so now, after the EU, I will turn to the AU and ask to Madame Amani Abu-Zaid, who is the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy in the African Union, what are the measures that the African Union has taken to support infrastructure development to foster an inclusive and more sustainable recovery? Up to you.
Thank you, Isabel, for inviting me to this very interesting, important high-level panel, and allow me at the outset to greet everyone, but mostly to wish a very happy birthday to our sister, Dr. Ngozi. All the best, success, health, and happiness going forward, Your Excellency. I know that here, I mean, I'm in a panel, you know, with the top people in trade, but let us just remind ourselves that infrastructure is a prerequisite for trade. So without transport, we cannot exchange goods. People cannot move. Without energy, there are no goods to be produced. There are digital give us, you know, another way of doing things, and now it became the norm, the new norm since last year. It is not a secret that Africa lags behind when it comes to infrastructure. We do have a serious deficit. And in financial terms, we're talking Africa needs between 130 billion to 170 billion dollars a year to bridge its infrastructure gap. This became much more pressing since last year, since COVID erupted, given the importance of infrastructure in and of itself, but also because we are operationalizing the African Free Trade Area that relies, as I said, in its operation on infrastructure. And it's true that January 1st saw the operationalization of the AFCFTA, and the first transaction took place on the 4th. However, we still have a long way to go in order to make sure that the benefits of the free trade area is widely shared and fairly shared, not only across the continent, but also worldwide. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, last year was also a way or a wake-up call for all of us, but particularly for us in Africa, to rethink our infrastructure model. I think it actually upstream. Thinking upstream, everybody has always said climate or inclusive, but now more than ever, when we see that energy that is necessary for trade, as I said, I mean, with the interruption of the supply chains, what better way to generate electricity but renewable energy that is readily available in Africa, and the resources and the potential is huge. So this is one. I mean, inclusiveness. We've seen also how, even though, I mean, some say, I mean, the statistics say Africa suffered less losses in lives than other regions of the world, even though, I mean, each and every life counts. The livelihoods have been seriously affected. And let us remember that most of the trade in Africa happens in the informal sector, not in the formal sector. I mean, Africa's economy, 70-80% of it is informal. And most of it are women. And women see 90% of their employment is in the informal sector. So one can imagine, you know, the devastation, the impact, the very serious negative impact of COVID on our economies, and the need, you know, to rethink the way we are doing things in terms of inclusiveness, but also to bridge, you know, urban and rural. Third is the importance of smart, the importance of digital. We are having this meeting thanks to digital. We are talking to each other thanks to digital. We are meeting with our friends, but also we are ordering food thanks to the digital. We are transacting using digital, and so on and so forth. So the digital agenda has to be and must be prioritized very, very fast. As I always say, digitalization is the infrastructure of the 21st century. No matter what business we are talking about, no matter what sector we are talking about, it has to be digitalized, and the business models have changed for good. But at the same time, we have to remember that only 30 to 40% of Africa is connected. So, which means that practically they are outside the economy we are talking about and the transactions we are talking about. This has pushed us to, as I said, to rethink our programs, and we do have it coincided with the time where we are preparing our second phase for infrastructure development in Africa, abbreviated as PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, that goes from 2021 to 2030. And we selected 69 projects, regional and transcontinental, that respond to upstream to several criteria. One of them is climate smart, climate friendly, green, low greenhouse gas emission. job creation, of course, inclusiveness, urban, rural. Remember, for us in Africa, this is very important. So it's not just in terms of gender, but geographically, there's also a need to integrate. So the integration, urban, rural, inclusion of women across the value chain. And I always stop here because it's not just as women beneficiaries or as women engineers or working in the field, of infrastructure, but also women contractors, large companies for women, for energy, for railways, for transport. So we are insisting on giving a fair share also in procurement for these very large programs of infrastructure to women. And last but not least, the regional corridors, which have to be fast-tracked in order to, at the same time, help the free trade area, as I said. This program, which was adopted and endorsed by our heads of states and government in February 2021, we're also developing the financial strategy for it, which is going to be discussed this month and hopefully adopted. And the program comes to complement other initiatives that we have launched before. One of them is the Single African Air Transport Market, as means to also promote intra-African air transport, lower the costs, and ensure much more movement of goods and people across the continent using airlines. We are putting lots of emphasis on railways, which was not the case before. Railways are being, rethought in terms of their ability of transporting people and goods, the low gas emission, the climate friendliness. And as I always say, the free trade area and or infrastructure, they are mutually catalytic. So energy transition in Africa is happening. It is happening as we speak, but it's also happening faster out of what we've seen last year and the importance of securing energy to everybody. And at the same time, it helps with the trade agenda and with the digitalization agenda. So we're moving across many tracks, and all of these policies, all of these initiatives, they complement each other, hence also the complexity. It's not an easy task. But as I discussed, you and I, as we mentioned before the session, COVID came also as a very strong and painful, very often wake-up call, but at least it allows us to revitalize our economies under a different agenda or a different framework, one that is greener, that is smarter, that also supports health, that supports the prosperity of people, all our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Amani, and thank you to remind us how infrastructure are key in trade and climate issues, and how important it is for Africa and African Union to work on the difference between rural and the connection between rural and urban areas, and the way to integrate environment in all the policies that you will develop in the next year. So thank you for that, and we will of course collaborate a lot in the next period. And now I turn to another region of the world and to Latin America, to Madame Rebecca Greenspan. And I would like to, she's currently Ibero-American General Secretary. And I would like to ask you, inequality in Latin America has been a long-standing challenge for the region. And for you, what can trade policy do to help these middle-income countries to address these challenges?
Thank you very much, Isabel. Do you hear me well? There is an alarm here in the background. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, there is a protest of the students. I am now in the University of Malaga, and we couldn't plan for the protest and the alarm. I'm sorry. This is the world we live in. Yes.
Yes.
So let me first, Isabel, thank you for inviting me, and I am looking forward to get there as soon as possible. And just greet my fellow panelists. Dear Dosi, happy birthday. And I see we both like the green transition. Amani, sister, nice to meet you. And Piyush and Valdis, very nice to share this panel with you. So, in fact, this is my first event as UNCTAD Secretary General-elect. I can tell you that I am eager to get there and continue the amazing work Isabel has been doing and UNCTAD has been doing for so long. I've been reading again the recent publications of the organization on trade, on gender, on innovation, on development and globalization. So it's a privilege really for me to soon join the ranks of UNCTAD and get to know all of this stuff in person. However, since in this panel I am representing still the Euro-American space, I will turn to Spanish. I'm sorry. Spanish is one of our official language, and it's also an official language of the UN. So let me, Isabel, sorry, turn to Spanish now. So, la pregunta que me hace Isabel es muy importante. Sorry, just a moment, I have to turn down the interpretation. Okay. Tristemente, América Latina es la región más desigual del mundo cuando hablamos de la distribución del ingreso. Pero en realidad en América Latina, como en el resto del mundo, no podemos hablar solo de la desigualdad en la distribución del ingreso, porque en realidad lo que tenemos es la intersección de muchas desigualdades, ¿no? Tenemos la desigualdad de género, tenemos la desigualdad de raza, tenemos la desigualdad, Amani, urbana, tenemos la desigualdad en el mercado laboral, 50% de nuestra población en el mercado informal, desigualdad educativa, así que es la intersección de desigualdades lo que hace tan difícil y lo que representa un obstáculo tan serio para el desarrollo. Ahora, yo debo enfatizar, Isabel, que por mucho tiempo nos dijeron que las desigualdades eran estructurales y que la desigualdad no se podía combatir, que se podía combatir la pobreza, pero no la desigualdad. Y yo creo que Latinoamérica ha probado que eso es falso. Precisamente, América Latina logró con el crecimiento del comercio internacional y por la importante marco del comercio internacional, bajar al mismo tiempo la pobreza y la desigualdad. Sustancialmente, durante los primeros 15 años de este siglo, ¿no? La pobreza y la desigualdad. Lo que pasa es que esto no sucede automáticamente. Tiene que ser una fuerza política explícita, porque si no hay políticas económicas explícitas, el resultado no se da. Y aquí lo que hubo política de redistribuir los beneficios del comercio internacional para bajar y la desigualdad al inicio de países de América Latina. Entonces, ese es nuestro primer aprendizaje, ¿no? Esto no sucede automáticamente y se requieren políticas explícitas. se requiere el espacio fiscal para poder hacerlo. ¿Cuál es el segundo aprendizaje? Lo que América Latina no hizo fue aprovechar el boom de los alimentos para cambiar su estructura productiva. Y por lo tanto, seguimos teniendo una estructura productiva muy heterogénea, unas economías muy duales, las que exportan al mercado. Cómo unir la estructura productiva para que el comercio internacional jale a todos y no solo un grupo de empresas modernas que pueden entrar al comercio internacional. Entonces, de alguna manera, nosotros decimos que hicimos bien la macroeconomía, pero hicimos mal la microeconomía. No tuvimos políticas sectoriales, no tuvimos políticas productivas que aumentaran el valor agregado. Ya lo decías tú, Isabel, cuando precisamente hiciste tu intervención. No tuvimos las políticas para mejorar la productividad, para insertarnos con mayor valor agregado en el comercio internacional, para cambiar nuestra matriz productiva, ¿no? Y ese fue el problema que hizo que nuestros avances de bajar la pobreza y las desigualdades fueran muy frágiles. Y por lo tanto, después de la crisis del 2008, América Latina comenzó a perder impulso y llegamos a la crisis del COVID-19 en una situación muy débil, donde se están revirtiendo los avances que hicimos a principios de siglo, ¿no? Y esto tiene que ver con eso, con que el problema no es qué producimos, sino cómo producimos. Y no nos dedicamos al cómo y nos dedicamos solo al qué, ¿no? Entonces, déjeme terminar diciendo lo siguiente. Esa es la razón por la cual la crisis del COVID-19 ha impactado desproporcionadamente a los países de América Latina. Yo quiero darles a los que nos escuchan un dato muy revelador. América Latina es el 8% de la población mundial y hoy en día representa el 30% de los fallecimientos globales. La desproporción con que esta pandemia ha golpeado a la región económica y socialmente es terrible. Entonces, queremos un desarrollo y una recuperación económica distinta, ¿no? Que sea más sostenible y que sea más inclusiva. Y yo creo que tienen razón ustedes, lo dijo Ngozi, lo dijo Isabel, lo dijo Valdis, la transición ecológica puede ser una gran oportunidad. Pero lo que sí tenemos que recordar son dos cosas, Isabel. Una, que no por ser verde es justo, no por ser verde es incluyente. Necesitamos las dos cosas. Necesitamos que sea verde, pero necesitamos que sea inclusivo, que sea incluyente. Eso no es automático. En segundo lugar, necesitamos hablar de comercio y desarrollo, como lo hace la UNCTAD. No es suficiente hablar de comercio porque tampoco es automático que a través del comercio haya desarrollo. Es una oportunidad, pero depende de las reglas internacionales, y aquí a mí me parece muy importante lo que ha dicho Piyush también, el hecho de que esto no se use como obstáculo, que no se use como proteccionismo, que es la demanda de los países en desarrollo. Y aquí yo quiero agradecerle a Valdis, que habló de los convenios de asociación que se están negociando con América Latina. El del Mercosur, el de México, el de Chile. Valdis, esta es una gran oportunidad. Y yo quiero decir que sería un error estratégico no aprobar el convenio del Mercosur entre Europa y Mercosur, que sería tan importante para nuestra región y que sería un también una señal de la voluntad de Europa de que la sostenibilidad con el comercio, con el desarrollo, sean un triángulo, y la sostenibilidad sean un triángulo, un círculo virtuoso para todos los países en desarrollo y para los países desarrollados. Así que yo termino con esto, querida Isabel. Yo creo que la UNCTAD ha escrito mucho sobre esto. Lo importante es hablar de comercio y desarrollo, no comercio, cueste lo que cueste, no comercio degradando el ambiente, pero tampoco comercio bajando los salarios de nuestros trabajadores o afectando negativamente a nuestra población. Tenemos que buscar el win-win, y por eso estamos acá. Rosy ya dio algunas de las cosas, Amani habló de la infraestructura, de la inversión que tenemos que hacer para cerrar las brechas. Esto tiene que ser holístico, tiene que ser integral. El comercio es parte de un ecosistema y por tanto nuestra apuesta tiene que ser por hacerlo bien, pero bien para todos. Muchas gracias, Isabel.
Muchas gracias, Rebeca, para la descripción de la situación en Latinoamérica y la manera de apoyar el desarrollo de la región. Je vais maintenant know that the situation is known from the different regions of the world. I would like to ask to all of you a more concrete question. I think that it's important to have a big picture on what is the situation on trade, environment, inclusivity in all the region of the world, and also regarding the WTO as an organization, but also to look at what can be done. And I have a question to the full panel. What is, in your view, the one of two things that we really need to achieve before the end of the year? So trade faster, a green and inclusive recovery, or the intersection between two. So please try to present to all the audience one or two things that you would like to do until the end of the year. And I will start in the other sense. So maybe I can ask to Rebecca to see what you would like to do, or of course in your new position probably, or even in your previous position. But what is important for you globally? The one or two things that we have to do until the end of the year, or to decide.
I have to say, Isabel, that I'm sorry to be so direct, but there are two things that are essential for us. One is vaccination, because how are we going to talk about recovery if vaccines are not getting to the developing world? Only 10% of the vaccines are getting to the developing world. COVAX has only 20% of the vaccines it needs for the developing world. There is a gap of 50 billion in COVAX that has to be financed. I welcome the G7 announcement of the 1 billion American billions, 1 billion of vaccines getting to the developing world is good news, but the financing gap is still there. And let me give you one example. In Latin America, one trimester if we postpone one trimester vaccination of the population, we lose 2 points of the GDP. So this is of the essence, and there is no time to be lost. And the truth is that, again, we have to say, nobody's safe until everybody is safe. And we have to raise our voice to make the necessary steps for universal vaccination and universal access to vaccine. That is the first priority. And my second priority is financing. We need the new instruments of the international financial system to be able to give this fiscal space to the developing world so they can do the things that have to be done, not only to rebound, but to take again the development path and the sustainable development path. but we don't have the fiscal space to do the investments and to assume the cost of the pandemic. So I also here welcome the decision to put forward, probably in August, the issuing of the special drawing rights in the IMF. This is important, 650 billion, trillions in American terms, dollars is a lot. Latin America will receive 68 billions. And this is more than the development banks have given to Latin America in 2020. So it's an important step. But most of the SDRs, of the special drawing rights, are going to the countries that don't need them. Because the US doesn't need them, it has the Federal Reserve. Because the EU doesn't need them, it has the Central European. But we need to find a way, a facility that will allow the countries that don't need the SDRs to give them to the countries that need the SDRs and link it not only to liquidity, but to development, to the investments that we need to do to be able to face this pandemic, to get to a new normal that won't be only new, but better. Build Back Better means more financing, more instruments in the multilateral development banks, in financial architecture, so we can do with responsibility, with accountability, but that we will have the means to face the crisis that our countries are facing. I think that this is the only way in which we can regain the time lost in terms of the sustainable development goals and do the transition, do the investments, and think about people and planet. If we don't have the means, we won't be able to do it.
Thank you, Rebecca, for those two issues. And I'm sure that all the speakers will have, of course, the same one, but maybe Amani, what is for you the things that African Union has to decide to do soon or as soon before the end of the year?
Of course, I cannot agree more with Rebecca regarding the vaccination, and it's unethical. What is happening in the world, what we're seeing in the world now is, the least to say it's unethical. I wouldn't have wanted to live in a world where health is considered more important than others. This is even, the most basic of rights, but I don't want to go there. I get very emotional when I do, and I will think, Rebecca said enough. But let me just say two things about what we do have in hand. I did mention about SMEs and micro enterprises, and I do believe that we need very fast to support at least these. Because they have been, you give us until the end of this year, so I'm talking within this time limit. SMEs and micro enterprises need to be helped very fast using digital tools, which have been now. I'm really happy to see that they are more widely used. They have the ability to employ people, to create income. So it's a solution that can help in the interim, until the full economies are pick up and we do have a fuller recovery. And the other thing that we are pushing very, very hard and very fast is mini-grid, off-grid solutions, especially for rural areas.
We lost you, maybe?
I'm sorry, I was disconnected. Yes. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm saying the second thing is faster deployment and intensive deployment of mini grids and off grid in rural areas that have the ability to connect to allow, for electricity and renewable energy to be used everywhere. Even the small wind power plants are a viable solution. They are flexible. They allow, for electricity connections, and so these are two things we are trying to push, because we have seen also that how that discrepancy between urban and rural, and how the innovations in terms of energy and the nexus energy digital can help us create these connections and help with the energy access soon. The third access, Madam Dr. Ngozi alluded to, but I'll push it further, something again that we have prioritized for a number of years, because it seems to be always absent from politicians and experts' discourse, is a clean energy for protein. And again, the COVID has shown that in addition to the large number of casualties and fatalities that we are seeing, mainly among women and children due to the use of polluting and sources of energy for cooking, mainly firewood, coal, and stuff like that, which creates respiratory problems and then also cause death and serious accidents. It fragilized, the health of the people, and especially women and children. And we want to see clean protein coming on top of the agenda of energy, and our energy ministers have approved gas also for cooking, being the cleanest of fossil fuel. So these are three tracks that we are really pushing this year, along with a much more general one. I know it's four, but everything is important, is a digital ID. And we do believe that an interoperable digital ID will also help tremendously with trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Amani. Mr. Commissioner, in the EU, which are the things that you would like to achieve or to succeed in the next months until the end of the year?
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe let me also start with a question of economic recovery, because as previous speakers already said, it's very important, the rollout of the vaccination for the recovery. And in this context, EU recently has came with a proposal to the WTO on how to address the global vaccination rollout by lifting export bans in the developing countries, where EU, for example, is exporting almost half of our vaccine production, by addressing, strengthening the production capacity through cooperation arrangements between those companies which have necessary know-how and those, including developing countries, which can provide additional manufacturing capacity. And separately, EU has come with an initiative on how to strengthen manufacturing capacity, specifically in Africa, and how to address intellectual property rights through the compulsory licensing scheme within the TRIPS framework. So now it's something which is important in a sense to set in the motion, because it's clearly that global vaccination rollout is an important element also for the economic recovery. Today's question, however, focuses on the green recovery. So let me come back to this topic, because that's indeed how we see the situation in the EU, that not only we need economic recovery, but we need to ensure that this economic recovery is green and inclusive. And there are, once again, important elements which can be done through trade policy. So that is one area which will be focusing this year. So making use of our trade deals to accelerate cooperation with trading partners on biodiversity, pollution, circular economy, sustainable food systems, We have committed to take a closer look on the impact of trade agreements on the environment. So we want to improve the implementation of and enforcement of existing commitments in so-called trade and sustainable development chapters. Plus, our new trade deals will include respect for a Paris Agreement as an essential element, and we will be seeking commitment to carbon neutrality with G20 partners. On the EU autonomous sides, we will put forward measures to ensure that trade is sustainable and not undercutting our climate action ambition. We already discussed carbon border adjustment mechanism, but there are other green measures, including to address deforestation, including due diligence. Of course, we will always prioritize working with our trading partners, even when we are acting autonomously, and we do so only after listening to the needs of our partners. But today, indeed, the focus is on the multilateral side. And there we see that, as I said, trade can play an important role, and through this also the World Trade Organization can play an important role. We agree that well-functioning WTO will be crucial for the global economic recovery. And once again, we must see how we make a step further to ensure that this recovery is also green and inclusive at the digital level. And the EU is fully supportive of Dr. Gozzi's ambition in this respect. And we will have a WTO Ministerial Conference, MC12, as an important stepping stone. We are preparing for it in a structured discussion on trade and environmental sustainability, which gathers together more than 50 WTO members, including some developing countries. In the MC12, we need a commitment from members on reinforcing the WTO's work on sustainable development and further mainstreaming environment-related work. This can be done either by ministerial declaration or a joint statement of like-minded countries. And we are thinking of the work program or specific actions in priority areas, like exploratory discussions on liberalization of green goods and services to foster climate mitigation and protect the environment, fostering transparency on WTO members' current and future domestic measures to reach zero net emission targets, different trade-related instruments, price on carbon, approaches to reduce fossil fuel subsidies, and greening the priorities set in the Aid for Trade biannual work program, and working in cooperation with international organizations to support the needs of developing countries transitioning towards resource-efficient, climate and environmentally friendly outcomes. So moving forward, we think that empowering WTO with real climate agenda should be important priority, and this work should begin already this year. And the next ministerial conference will be important opportunity which we should not waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. A lot of things, and it's now the turn of Madame Gozzi, and it's important because the Commissioner spoke about MC12 and how we could really succeed, and how also UNCTAD could help before and after MC12 to really help in this regard. So, Madame Gozzi, what is your priorities in the next times?
I think I'm the most fortunate person here in this panel, because I've got all the people so willing to work with and support the WTO. I want to thank Valdis for that very strong statement of support and wanting to see a success, and Isabel for the collaboration with UNCTAD, which we've already started. I believe we work hand in hand. And of course, Minister Piyush, our work together here at the WTO, trying to get to success, is also very important. But let me start by saying that first, I really want to pick up on what Rebecca said on vaccination. This is because, first and foremost, we can't recover without it. That statement is true, and everyone has repeated it. Trade policy is vaccine policy, and vaccine policy is trade policy. And trade can play a very important role. I'll just be very quick. There are three ways we can support. Valdis mentioned the reduction in export prohibitions and restrictions, which will make sure that supply chains kept free for outputs and inputs. That's critically important. We had 109 restrictions at the start of the pandemic. We came down to 51, and a week ago, we are now back to 53. So the trend is going in the wrong direction. We need to bring those restrictions down so that we can move goods and supplies, medical goods and supplies and vaccines. The second area we can be helpful as WTO and trade is on the issue of working with industry. Again, Valdis spoke of increasing manufacturing capacity, which I think is very important and an essential part of this. We need to decentralize production in the world because 80% of exports come from 10 countries, and we've seen that that doesn't really work. Developing countries are taking note that politics can trump all the best wishes in the world. If your population is dying, you're not going to be able to export vaccines to other places or any medical products. So the world has to rethink the distribution of manufacturing for medical products. And investing in manufacturing is very important. The EU is putting in €1 billion to this effect, mostly in Africa, and we are quite grateful. President Biden has talked about the Quad and investment in India and other places. That is also extremely welcome. There we can work with industry on a voluntary monitoring of supply chain constraints. And we're actually talking to industry now with ICC, the International Chambers of Commerce, with WHO and CEPI and Gavi. We want to set up a voluntary monitoring system to see the bottlenecks and remove those. The third aspect is what has also been spoken about, which is the transfer of technology and know-how and the IP waiver issue. The debate is going on here. It's a critical part of the package. And what I'm pleased about is that last week, I think we made a move forward with all members agreeing to sit down to text-based negotiations. This is what has been my mantra, and trying to work behind the scenes to get all members, because we can't move forward if we can't even sit to look at text. So now we have a revised text from the proponents, India and South Africa, which is supported by the vast majority of developing countries. But we also now have a proposal by the EU that Valdis referred to. But when I listened to the discussion, what was very interesting is that the EU and others said they are willing to look at text-based negotiations of the proposal. So I'm hopeful. It's going to be tough because, there are still differences, but we hope we can get to a pragmatic approach. And I'm in a hurry. I want us to get to some agreement by July because lives are involved. It need not be perfect, but something that will point the way so that by MC12, we can have an agreement. So that's my first point. Trade can be really critical in the vaccine story. I think the second one is a successful conclusion to the fisheries subsidies negotiations. Look, we are talking of COP26, but there's also the biodiversity conference, which will hold in October in China. And I think we have to remember that biodiversity is a large part of this. And what we are doing in the fisheries subsidies contributes to the sustainability of our oceans and our fish stocks. We've been negotiating this for 20 years. I think we just have to conclude it. I'm hopeful again that something will happen. We have a July 15 meeting. There's still serious differences between members, but I think we can try to bridge those differences. Why? We can't continue to negotiate an agreement for 20 years if we're really serious about people. It's about fishermen and women. It's about sustainability of fish stocks. Enough already. That's what I said. We've got to get it done. So that is for this year. Even if we don't completely succeed by July, I want to see significant progress by ministers. I think the third area is the MC12 itself. having a successful conference, MC12 ministerial for WTO, will send a very sharp signal about what trade can contribute to environment. And within that, I want to support what Valdis said. We want a strong ministerial declaration on environment. I personally believe trade has a big role to play in environment, and a strong declaration that sets out the areas we can work in, including possibly a revival of the negotiations on environmental goods and services, which were stopped in 2016. I think we need to revive that and see how we can get a work program to move that forward. And other areas I won't go into detail again, we've already talked about that we can get a ministerial statement and declaration on that. And then the fourth area is one that I really want to put on the table and say, look, the WTO would like to work with other financial institutions, with governments and so on, to see how the $26 trillion in fiscal stimulus that has already been implemented in the economies all over the world can be used in a way that is more inclusive and that is greener and that supports an inclusive trading system. This is a lot of money that is slushing in the world, and it's leading to a faster global recovery. So as an economist, it's great. I love it. But I think it should be used in a way that is greener and more inclusive, and that leads to more inclusive and greener trade as well. So that's another wish that I see by the end of this year. Let's all link hands to see how the multilateral institutions working with governments and other partners can really make this fiscal stimulus work for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Gozi. And just before the biodiversity discussion conference, and of course before MC12, you have also UNCTAD 15, first week of October, and count on us if we can help. We would like to help or to contribute for all the agreement that you can, I hope, succeed in the MC12. So I think that we are together and trying really to help and to contribute to good agreement or something which is a good step in the good direction. So count on us, and I count on you also for our conference. So last but not least, of course, it's important to listen to Minister Goyal, what India has in mind in the next steps or in the next weeks and months regarding what has to be done. Of course, vaccine, maybe, but maybe other things that you would like to highlight. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Isabel. At the outset, let me join everybody in wishing my good friend, Dr. Ngozi, a long life in the service of the world now, going far beyond our own country and family and region. We all pray for a very, very long and successful innings in the WTO and long life serving the world. I think the discussion has been very, very exciting, largely centered around vaccines and economic recovery. Of course, if the supply lines are kept open, technology is kept made available liberally, and we ensure adequate finance, I think India itself can play a very major role in the global effort of providing vaccines, essential medicines to the rest of the world. We are often called the pharmacy of the world. And I would like to assure all the panelists that India has the capability and the intention to be an important element in this effort to vaccinate the world. I'm sure most panelists may be aware that we are amongst the very few countries which have exported vaccines, even despite having very serious large requirements in the country. We understand that unless the whole world gets vaccinated, and therefore nearly 90 plus countries receive vaccines from India, the less developed, the poorer countries who could not afford vaccines even receive them free of charge. So India can play a very important role and will play an important role in ensuring equitable availability of vaccines and medicines. And this effort at the WTO and the effort even at the G7 to ensure that supply lines are open, will certainly contribute to that. Economic recovery is driven by a lot of stimulus, and it's a very sad situation where people are being driven to poverty due to COVID-19. And I think everybody has to work together as a team to create new infrastructure, maybe invest in clean energy or renewable energy, invest in economic growth and trade, international trade, so that we can get people out of economic distress faster. We in India have focused over the last 6-7 years on ensuring 100% electricity connections, 100% access to toilets to all our people, 100% financial inclusion, ensuring everybody, 100% of our population gets access to clean cooking gas, and transitioning from the old traditional methods of cooking. We've transitioned 100% to energy efficient LED lighting from the old incandescent bulbs. We are working very actively now towards 100% access to a proper home for all our people. 100% access to clean drinking water from a tap in every home. We have the world's largest free healthcare program, Ayushman Bharat, under which 500 million people in India have access to medical facilities free of charge. We are going to expand it to 100% coverage, that every citizen in India, every resident in India gets access to healthcare. And therefore, in the next few months, we are investing very heavily on upgrading our healthcare facilities and expanding them to prepare ourselves for any future waves of COVID-19 pandemic or any future health crisis that the world may or India may have to face. So large investments in healthcare is one area India is focused on. We are also focusing a lot of our investments in renewable energy production, in investing deeply in infrastructure. I also run the railways in India, and the Honorable Prime Minister only yesterday appraised the G7 countries that Indian Railways will be the world's first large railway. We have about a 130,000 track kilometer length railway, which will run 100% on electricity by 2023. And by 2030, they will all run on clean energy. Will be a net zero railway by 2030. I think Dr. Amani talked about mobility as an important element of sustainability and a clean future. And India is taking that very seriously. Electric vehicles, for instance, is a program on which we are very, very committed and moving fast. We are working with other countries to develop hydrogen as a means of mobility in the future. So I can assure all the participants that a clean environment, inclusive development which is sustainable, is a priority agenda for India, which believes that nature is important for us and protecting the nature is our collective responsibility of all participants in the world. I must also join my support to Ms. Dr. Ngozi in working towards a final outcome on the text-based negotiations on the proposal for TRIPS waiver, but also on a successful MC12. We all are hoping and praying for big outcomes, but Dr. Ngozi knows my views on it. We cannot prioritize only the agenda of the developed world. We will also have to address issues that have been long pending. The asymmetries in agricultural subsidies, for instance, the permanent resolution of the peace clause or public stockholding, which has also been pending for years and years. So I think, and India, for example, has provided free ration, free food grain to 800 million Indians during the COVID pandemic. First until November last year, all through from March till November. then since things were getting better, we were able to stop that program. But May onwards, May, June, and right up to November, we have again announced free food grains for 800 million Indians, particularly looking at the distress that the world and India is facing due to COVID. And it's only because of our public procurement program that we are able to provide such support to such a large number of people to ensure that nobody dies of hunger. And these are our effort towards sustainable development goals, and not by 2030, as has been collectively decided. We are working, and as I showed you, in so many areas: clean energy, clean water, housing, financial inclusion. We are working towards this agenda with the whole of the government approach. And Prime Minister Modi is totally focused on making this happen, not by 2030, a lot of things by 2022, when we turn 75 years of independence, and some of the other areas at the earliest. There's no waiting for tomorrow in Prime Minister Modi's words. And I can assure you that for us, getting solutions to the teeming millions is extremely important, is extremely urgent, because as our ancient texts and our heritage has taught us, and while addressing the Mother Earth, if I may quote from our ancient texts, we talk to Mother Earth and say, "May whatever we dig from you grow back again quickly, and may we not injure you by our labor." That, ladies and gentlemen, is India's intrinsic desire to give back to Mother Earth. As the saying goes, after the last no comes a yes. And on that yes, the future of the world hangs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Goyal. I think that it's really a promising agenda for India, of course, but also for the rest of the world. So it's true that we have now a lot of things on our plate, and I also received a lot of remarks or questions through the chat. My team tried to look at that, and I would ensure to all the participants that even if we cannot, of course, take all the questions, we will also drive them to the panel of this afternoon, which are topical panels, very important on specific issues, and also for tomorrow, so it's not lost. But I would like just to ask you regarding what we receive as question. There is a questions regarding supply chain. And just as it was said, how can the countries work together to mitigate the devastating effects on supply chain, and how we can foster sustainable supply chain? That's really something which is coming back in a lot of question and remarks. And a second one touched the aspect of the crisis of 2008. What do we learn about this crisis? Do we take this opportunity to change and not to repeat maybe some mistakes in the past, and trying to really go to this greener path? Maybe it's also related to what was said about the special drawing rights and how we reallocate the money which is available. So two questions, one on the supply chain and how it has to be changed or adapted, and the lessons that we learned from the crisis of 2008 and how we will do differently, maybe better, but also differently. I start with you, Minister, because you are in front of me. So what in those two questions, how do you react to that?
Well, I think as far as the supply chains go, I have also been a little bit involved in the production of vaccines and the rollout and the work that we are doing to expand our capacities. Each of the vaccines requires, in some cases, 150 products, different machineries, different small elements that are required for the production to be expanded and expedited. Similarly, in the medicines, the essential medicines, you require active pharmaceutical ingredients or some key starting materials. I was handling oxygen in my country. And while we were ramping up our oxygen supplies and trying to set up more pressure swing absorption plants, we realized that zeolite is a product that's very important for expanding the PSA plants in the country. Now, zeolite is a steel that is made by very few countries, but it is necessary in the production of oxygen. So all of these elements, each of our vaccine manufacturers, we already have 2 vaccines being made in India. Covaxin by Bharat Biotech. It's an indigenously developed vaccine which uses the virus technology itself, and the AstraZeneca from vaccine Covishield. Now, both of them, the suppliers tell us, need many, many products from all around the world, from Europe, from the United States, from UK, from China, from other parts of the world. So I think if all of us can globally agree that we'll ensure that these supply chains, nobody will come in the way, then I think India alone can not only vaccinate 1.35 billion people, which is essential, as we have all agreed that all the 7 billion people of the world need to be vaccinated because nobody is safe till the other is safe. But we'll also play a very, very critical and important role in supplying vaccines to the rest of the world, which we've demonstrated in the past and we will continue to do in the future. From the 2008 lesson, I think the most important lesson is that the developed world may not land up in over-adventurism in terms of fiscal proliferance or let's say, let the money or the liquidity go beyond limits, which at some stage could then become detrimental in the future when we are trying to bring back, let's say, financial stability in the markets. Also, at the same time, as was said earlier, I think it's important that this huge financial stimulus is used for more inclusive growth, more balanced growth across the world. And lastly, I do hope that credit rating agencies and agencies which, like the IMF, which kind of dictate the financial architecture of the world, do not land up being unfairly harsh on the developing and less developed countries, because this is a time to be compassionate, this is a time to be more liberal, and this is a time to be more supportive of less developed and developing countries. And I think a little longer rope needs to be given, even to earlier agreements or earlier commitments, so that these countries have space to bring back their economies on track. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Mr. Goyal. So, Madam Ghazi, supply chain and the lessons of the crisis of 2008.
Well, thank you so much, Isabel. And on the supply chain issue, I think there are a couple of aspects I alluded to earlier, and I think I'll expand on now in order to foster sustainability in future. We learned at the beginning of this crisis, there were disruptions in supply chains at the beginning of the pandemic that were really disruptive in the world. And although trade played a very central role after, and I want to mention, people shouldn't forget that even though the value of trade overall declined by 7% last year, the value of trade in medical goods and supplies actually increased 16%, and personal protective equipment 50%, and so on and so forth. So trade played a very central role, and the supply chain was resilient by and large. There may be some thinking of reshoring of some supply chains because of what has happened. But I think that will not be as pronounced as people may think because of the intricacies of this supply chain, which Minister Piyush referred to. First of all, for Johnson & Johnson, their supply chain is 180 components manufactured in about, more than 30-something sites and in 15 or so countries. For Pfizer, it's 280 components manufactured at 86 sites. in 19 countries. And for AstraZeneca, the supply chain is over 15 countries. So you've got a very complicated set of supply chains. So, it's not one that can easily all be reshored. So what will happen? I think that companies are going to take a more risk-based approach to their supply chains, and they may diversify these supply chains so that they're not concentrated in specific areas. I think some of that will happen. But I think most important to maintaining sustainability of supply chains is transparency. Transparency on the part of our members in the WTO, in whose countries these supply chains are based, in terms of the measures, the export restrictions and prohibitions and so on that they enforce when we have problems. These have to be kept to the minimum, and they have to be declared to the WTO. It's part of our role. We have a monitoring function of all these export restrictions and prohibitions. And so that will be very important to maintain sustainability. I think another aspect is the one that I talked about in earlier on, which is I would want to work with companies on this voluntary monitoring of supply chain bottlenecks, raw materials and supplies. When we met with companies, they talked about raw materials and supplies being scarce, not easy to get, because for vaccines, for instance, they also compete with other vaccines and cancer drugs. And monitoring where the bottlenecks are, personnel, all these are things which I think will help us maintain sustainability in future. And we need to put them in place now, not later, so that if this pandemic continues or we have another one, we're well placed to manage it. Now, on the issue of the learnings from the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, I think there are two things. One is that we were able at that time to develop what you might call a surge capacity to deal with the impacts of the financial crisis. And, for the first time in a long time, the fund issued $283 billion worth of STRs. And this helped with the faster recovery of the world. The lesson learned this time is we can do that again. And this time the fund will issue an amount that is unprecedented, $650 billion of SDRs. And I think Rebecca referred to this. The issue there is learning to reallocate these to countries that really need them, because they go into the central banks of countries, and most developed countries don't need these SDRs. So they need to find a mechanism to reallocate it to poor countries that don't have the fiscal space. So we've learned that is a good lesson, surge capacity. I think we need to do more of that and put that as an automatic thing to do in future if we have a crisis. The second thing that we've not yet come to grips with is that from the financial crisis, the world's finance ministers and central bank governors put in place a system for monitoring the financial system called the Financial Stability Board, the FSB, which was actually led by Mario Draghi, the now Prime Minister of Italy. And is doing a very good job of monitoring the financial system and alerting where the issues are emerging. We need a similar mechanism to monitor the health system, so that if there's and be prepared. If a pandemic is going to happen, we need the surveillance. We need a global governing mechanism to look over these things. I think that is an important lesson, and I hope we'll be able to come up with that. Such a mechanism has been suggested by various panels, including one that I'm on for the G20 finance ministers. So I think that is a very important lesson for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice. So, Mr. the Commissioner, we have a little bit a time constraint, so it's important that you could really try to highlight what is important for you in those two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first, on the question of supply chain sustainability, resilience of supply chains, this work is indeed ongoing. It's important in a context of vaccines, as several colleagues already mentioned. and this was part of the EU initiative of not putting all kind of restrictions, export restrictions, and also keeping supply chains open. But also in a broader context in the EU, we looked at the resilience of the EU supply chains in a context of pandemic and looked at more than 5,000 goods. And actually, we have got the conclusions that only in 30-something goods representing 0.6% of the total import value, there are supply chain problems where there is a difficulty for companies themselves to address. So all in all, the conclusion is that actually the supply chains have been fairly resilient, also even in a context of such a major shock what we were facing in a pandemic. And part of the problem was actually more on global production capacity in a context of sudden surge in demand, like for example in individual protective equipment, masks, where we faced some problems at the very beginning of the pandemic. But nevertheless, it's something on one hand which we need to monitor and make sure that indeed our supply chains are strong, resilient, and diversified. On the other hand, we must avoid some temptations towards protectionism as a response to the pandemic. Then, as regards the lessons learned from the previous crisis, indeed, I think there are lessons learned. If you look at the response now, also at the EU level, providing very substantial stimulus to the economy. And from the EU side, we strongly supported this IMF initiative of issuing new general SDR allocation of 650 billion euros. And we are now indeed from the European Commission side supporting this, exploring options how to best channel those special drawing rights, so channeling of unused special drawing rights allocations. So I would say most likely on the voluntary basis, and there are some discussions now ongoing also following the G7 summit in this. But of course, there are other ways how we can provide support through the COVAX facility, where EU is one of the largest financial contributors, not only contributors of vaccines, but also, for example, through the debt services suspension initiative, where from the EU side, we have been very clear that also we are going willing to go beyond that also in this particular area. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Amani, what are your remarks?
I'm aware of the constraint of time, so I will add my voice to many of the things that have been said before, but I will also stress the issue of rethinking the supply chain of, instead of the linear one that we're having one that also more interconnected, that allows for local, regional, and global, say, manufacturing and exchanges. We are putting, when we should be putting more emphasis on local content of transfer of knowledge and transfer of know-how to allow for these locally and regionally produced and or manufactured goods to be to take place. And I cannot avoid not to mention digitalization, because digitalization also helps with to improve, on the supply chain, given that it gives us, a real-time visibility, and it monitors, the supply chain end to end. And in my view, this is something that is very important that where we are having now. As for the local content, regional, locally produced and or manufactured goods, transfer of knowledge, transfer of know-how, digital and digitalized, much more digitalized supply chain end to end. And on the issue of sustainability, remember, I mean, more circular products, circular economy, sources of energy should be looked into, that the transport has to be looked into in a way that made them greener, in addition to the many things that were said before. I'm very much aware of the constraint of time.
Thank you, Amani, for that. Rebecca?
Yes, very quickly, Isabel, because I think that my colleagues have really covered almost everything. So let me emphasize two things. One, we need a rule-based world. And for that, we have to commit to multilateralism, and we have to strengthen multilateralism. And in that sense, dear Ngozi, what you are doing in WTO and recovering the role of WTO is so important. So MC12, very important. UNCTAD 15, very important. The Biodiversity Convention and the COP that are meeting this year, very important too. And the G20 meeting that needs to hear our voice so we can get a policy coherent framework. Because the other problem is that if we don't have policy coherence, so what we do in one place is a race, but what we do or not do in the other one. So let's work together. Let's go for a policy coherent framework. And let's go for something that UNCTAD says in the Trade and Development Report that I like very much. Let's go from hyper-globalization to interdependency. That is the notion that has to drive us in what is coming now. And I think that really, and I'm sorry to say this, it's a bit very strong, but I think that we are starting the 21st century because the pandemic has hit and changed the life of each of us. So this is really the change of era that we were talking about. If we don't face it together, if we don't go for the interdependency framework, if we commit the same mistakes that we did in 2008, if we go too fast to fiscal consolidation without the room to really change the model of development, the paradigm, so we won't end in a better place. So let's really use the international fora to build the consensus that we need as a world to bring all these issues together for the win-win-win situation, so we can take the opportunities, we can face the risks, and we can answer to the demands of so many people that are really waiting for a better future and are suffering really a lot during this year.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca, for this fantastic conclusion. Help us to really pave the way for the next months, all of us in our respective capacities. And frankly, I would like really to thank you for, well, the fantastic and amazing way to collaborate, to really be on one hand very pragmatic, on the other hand very global, and having this holistic approach. I think that is promising for the next months. I hope that we can keep the same spirit on short term, and I'm sure that it will help also our member states in UNCTAD to really negotiate as best as possible the next mandate for the next 4 years for UNCTAD, because it's also a partner in this discussion, in order to really help and equip the developing countries in this important period. So thank you to all of you. And I would like to ask you a last thing. Look at the camera. Just have the possibility to make a comment picture, just to remind this important discussion. So look at the camera, me too, and we will take, not me, but somebody will take a picture. So thank you to all of you, and I hope see you soon. I think it's okay. So see you soon, I hope, physically, and thank you so much to all of you.
Happy birthday, Ngozi.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday, Dr. Ngozi, and congratulations, Rebecca.
Bye.
Goodbye.
The recording has stopped.